But I do have to make
Okay, we're gonna get started. Sorry for the delay, guys. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see so many of you here. I'm Fenella Saunders. I'm the editor-in-chief of American Scientist magazine. I also work with the TP chapter of Sigma Xi, who are one of the ones hosting this event today. So we also have sponsorship from the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, who provide us with a visa. So thanks, guys, for providing that. And we also collaborate with science communicators of North Carolina to help us with organizing our speakers and our postings afterwards. If you guys ever miss any of our talks, they end up posted on the American Scientist website. So you can go back and view some talks later if you ever go back and do that. Just a reminder that we run these during the academic calendar. So we'll have one in May. And then after that, we'll take a break for the summer and be back in September. You can sign up for our email list, and we can help you do that if you want notices for upcoming events. I'm not sure how everybody heard about our events. We try to post them all over the place, but you can get emails about them. We don't send out emails for any other reason than the events. So if you want to sign up for emails, let us know. So without further ado, let's dive in for what everybody is here for today. We're really excited to have Dr. Deborah Littlejohn, who is an associate professor of graphic experience design in the College of Design at NC State University. She's taught master's and undergraduate design courses in the area of history, theory, and methods, and studios that focus on design as a cultural cognitive artifact. Her research in the field of visual communication at the intersection of science communication focuses on developing frameworks and custom visualization tools adopted from visual communication strategies in design for scientists and science educators to support the communication of science to diverse audiences and stakeholders. So today we're going to have Dr. Littlejohn talk to us about visualizing science with the audience in mind. Thank you so much.
So I'll just jump right in since we're a little late. My presentation, it focuses on visual communication, specifically how we use, visuals. That includes images, photography, and especially data visualization. That's kind of what my interest is. But I am not a data scientist. I'll say that. I'm on the data science curriculum board because there's a whole visualization thread in that curriculum that I sort of advise on, but I will say I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a data expert. I use data a lot, but I use it in the visual sense. How best to show the findings of research, complex ideas to different types of audiences. And that isn't just the general public. So we're going to discuss. Okay, it works. We're going to talk about why visual communication, because I know you're science communicators, right? And there is somewhat of a difference between communication, theories of communication in general, how we write, how we speak, and visual communication. So I want to get into that a little bit and talk about why it matters. I'm sure you guys have a sense of that too. I want to show you a real project and two sort of practical filters for understanding or evaluating your own visuals that you create. How many of you guys do a lot of presentations to audiences in general, whether written, journal publications, presentations to various groups? How many of you guys have done that, do that on a regular basis? A lot of you. Or for class, I mean, presentations we do in class applies as well. So we're going to look at a real project. We're going to look at one or two of the frameworks out there.
I'm going to get your extra stuff off your screen here. That's not...
Oh, sorry, I wasn't even paying attention. Sorry about that.
Oh, great.
Yep.
You could slide that maybe.
I wasn't even looking at my slides, so it didn't.
Just make sure it's not blocking views.
If you see a typo, just don't tell me. Look at some frameworks for making visual trade-offs, so making decisions, visual decisions. And then we're going to look at a few core strategies for, questioning your own, I should have put visual science communication efforts. my hope. Parents.
Try hitting the space bar. Not advancing.
Hurts today.
Um,
Yeah, it was a second ago. Should I just?
It's not advancing, Mike, I'm sorry.
Yeah, clicker.
Sorry.
What?
Keep talking if you.
Yeah.
I don't want to get us too far behind, but you'll see. There we go. Takeaways. This is one of the science communications. Okay. Sorry about that. So you leave this room with anything, I hope that you will have an understanding of how visual decisions, when you create data visualizations, when you create your slides, when you choose any sort of visual element, they're not neutral. They're neutral. They're decisions that you make consciously. Also, how I want you to understand that the best visuals are the ones that are tailored to an audience with a specific purpose in mind. And that is through these small visualization decisions, they actually have an effect on audiences and readers, especially when it comes to building trust and understanding of the science you're trying to present. Yes. All right. We can kind of anchor all of this in a body of quite hefty evidence-based resources and conceptual frameworks from respected scientific institutions. This is sort of a rendering that I did of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. It's they have a toolkit. They have an excellent communication toolkit that emphasizes, you know, that communicating science, it is a skill that takes practice, but you know, mainly it's about applying the core principles of communication to scientific topics. Just to get a sense, how many of you are sort of majors in science communication? I mean, you know, it is a field that can be earned a degree. You can earn a degree in that, right? Versus how many of you are in the sciences of some sort as students, teachers, faculty, learners, etc. That's pretty much everybody. Okay. Trying to think if there's another sort of category, right? But if you're a science communicator, you know that there are reams and reams of tools out there for how to create great communications and communicate those to audiences. What I do in my work, I take some of these core strategies from communicating science from places like the American Association for the Advancement of Science, their toolkit, and other places. And I try to build in sort of the visual theories, the visual frameworks that exist out there with these, because, you know, I mean, there's differences in visual communication versus verbal and written communication, right? Anyone who's a communication major can tell you that. I am not. But however, we're talking about different modes of communication. Data can be communicated in many different formats, and the right format, of course, depends upon the audience that you're communicating to, the setting, that's, you know, sort of this framework, the context, the platform, the message in the media, and setting the decision or the knowledge that you want to communicate to your audience. You know, one reason that visualization matters a lot is speed, frankly, like quick understanding. Our visual system can interpret patterns much faster than we can read a paragraph. So if I tell you something like, you know, group A increased from 12 to 18 while group B stayed flat at 12, you can understand that, you know, verbally. You can you have to kind of hold the numbers in your mind. And of course, if I just show you what that looks like, you can kind of get it very quickly at a glance. So this idea of glanceability is important when your audience, especially they're tired, they're cranky, they're skeptical, or simply unfamiliar with your domain, right? Excuse me, I am. Oh, are you out in Zoom land? All right, to make all this kind of concrete, I want to share this story about, one of my past projects, to make the point that most visualization problems, they're not chart problems, they're communication problems. And a few years ago, my research team, we worked with NC State's Institute for Emerging Issues. Have you guys heard of that? Do you know of that institution? They're all about improving North Carolina, studying North Carolina, studying its education, its infrastructure, its assets and things like that. They have a lot of programming. But this was one of their major multi-year projects called Innovate NC. And the aim, of course, was to better understand and ultimately North Carolina's capacity for innovation. They began with this pilot study of 5 cities selected to represent, rural communities, larger urban communities, and and what they wanted to do is they wanted to collect data about these pilot cities and create prototype visuals and information and understanding of their assets and what the communities felt about their assets. To sort of understand the innovation infrastructure. So IEI contracted with a data analytics firm here in the Triangle to run surveys, and they produced what by normal scientific standards was a strong deliverable. It was a detailed report with statistical breakdowns, charts and documentation. They totally analyzed the data and presented it as a data scientist would, right? And then they handed the report over to the community leaders at the IEI, and then would then transfer it to the actual people who lived in the cities that would be those stakeholders of, who might be presenting something to governments and, for example, advocating for investments, making the case to funding agencies, and so prioritizing local initiatives. So that is what this data was collected for and analyzed for, to understand people's interpretations of each city's innovation assets. And the key moment, for me and for, I think, the IEI as well, was when, they handed this report over, they received it, and stakeholders and the city leaders, they said, we don't know what to do with this. So nothing was wrong with this report. I mean, it was thorough, it was well written, it was clear, but it was produced by data experts for data experts, right? Rather than for decision makers who needed to extract defensible points and communicate them clearly to other humans, right? So, what we did, this is not sort of the main point of the story. The main point of the story is this idea of once you have all this data and you have to communicate it, it's really important to consider the audience who you have to communicate it to. And that's more than your thesis defense. That's more than the journal that you're trying to get published in. There's so many venues that scientists have to communicate. Consider what they are visualizing. So what we produced, in a sense, it was just this, it was let's call it an interactive toolkit that empowered the clients to create their own data stories. They could input the city's data, they could input the data that was most important to them in that moment. if they had to build a special argument about something, they could highlight the data that they wanted to. So, they had all these templates that they could choose from and all these different, communication modalities. And they would select button, and then generate their own data visualizations in the form of like slides, if it were a slide presentation, posters, if it were needed to be, kind of left behind, sent through the mail, et cetera, et cetera. And, the same sort of underlying data, it could be framed differently depending upon that context. So a city manager might need one message for a budget meeting, while a nonprofit leader might need a different message for a grant, pitch. So the lesson is straightforward. The visual assets that you build for your written or verbal communications they're only as successful as the decisions or the knowledge or knowledge acquisitions of the audience that they're trying to support. I think, this story, it gives us a kind of clean way to talk about and think about audience-centered visual communication. Before you start debating, which chart type to use, there are 2 questions that you can ask. And this is in addition to the so many different guidelines that you could find through books and the visualization community. There's mountains of them. They would reach from here to the moon if you stack them. These are 2 simple, very simple questions to ask. Can I read it? This is legibility. And do I want to read it? And that's the key one, that second one. And by the way, reading, I have to say something about that, because reading is not just about textual words. Reading, we read images. We also see text. So this idea of like seeing and reading, they're not separate activities. I mean, our brain certainly processes them differently, but humans still, to glean the meaning, they read the image, they read the data visualization, they read the text. So legibility is about the thing being read or viewed. And, can somebody physically and cognitively decode it? Things like font size, contrast, clutter, whether the legend is readable, whether the axis labels are, they collide, whether colors are distinguishable. That's legibility. It's the technical aspect, right? Very tight word letting in that bottom thing, as well as the top, where there's not enough contrast in the room to see what's being projected on the slides, right? Readability, the do I want to read it, is about the reader or the audience, the listener. Do they want to spend the effort on it? And can they sustain attention long enough to get the point? If you've ever tried to read a consumer contract when you sign up for a credit card or something like that, or a bank account, whatever, you've experienced this lack of readability, right? The font, it's perfectly legible. It's black and white, sans serif type. Maybe it's set too small, but the letters themselves are legible. But when you look at the document as a whole, where it's all squished and little and it's written in complicated legalese language, it's technically legible, but it's not readable. And just, again, keep in mind that these principles can be applied to images as much as text and slides that have text on them. So when you think about your own visuals, when you go back and start creating some presentation that you have to do, what you can kind of look for, especially if you share it with somebody else to sort of test it, look for the moments when, where people start slowing down, because they're not because they're thinking about something, because they're confused or they're lost, right? That's kind of a telltale signal that it's a readability problem. It's not an intelligence problem, right? So like I said, in addition to, your own disciplines, science, communication, resources, you can find mountains of guidelines from the visualization community. You'll find rule books, you'll find heuristics and checklists, and all of that to me seems so overwhelming. And I think what it really points out, behind the scenes, is that communication contexts vary so much, right? That there's no really single one way to do it properly, to visualize information properly. Different audiences, different communication goals, and many different media platforms to choose from. All of these things require choices and conscious choices. The skill of visual communication, therefore, it's not about memorizing rules. It's concerned with learning how to make trade-offs intentionally and making intentional trade-offs. Framework, is anyone familiar with Alberto Cairo? Oh, have heard of him? Good. I was worried that you might be, because then this might be really boring, or you've seen it before. This is an excellent resource, I will say. I don't believe in guidebooks per se. They're a good starting point when someone is starting out, that's for sure. This is it's a framework that Alberto Cairo calls the tension wheel in visualization. The idea is that good visualization involves balancing tensions rather than following absolutes. You can push towards complexity or towards simplicity, towards novelty, towards familiarity, dense analysis, or a quick communication message. But none of these is better than the other. The choice is informed by your knowledge of the audience's expertise and the information needs. And by the way, I don't know if Cairo does this jokingly or not, but the top half of the wheel is what the engineers and scientists like, and the bottom half is what the lay audiences and data journalists and data folks like. There's a lot of overlap in it, but it's just, I think he's making a joke, but maybe not. Maybe this it is something that he is studying, I know, but I'm not sure that it's totally generalizable. So I want to just kind of go through some of them quickly and posit the one that's the most kind of controversial and important. So familiar chart types they're powerful because they reduce cognitive burden. Right? We all know what a pie chart's supposed to do and how it looks when we see it. There's variations on that theme though, right? That might be surprising. The pro of using familiar, I'm so sorry, abstract, I meant abstract. They're faster. Abstract elements are faster to read. Bars make it easy to see which value is larger. Figural forms, they can make topics feel more concrete and memorable. If that's what that's your communication goal, is to convince an audience, to move an audience towards action, right? Figural images incorporated into data visualization can engage them. So the risk, of course, again, is that these figural elements, they can reduce the precision. People notice the picture more than the scale. So a practical rule would be, use figural elements to support meaning, and then use abstract elements to support measurement. Sometimes the measurement part is the important part. So here we are with the familiar versus original. I'm not exactly sure why he called it original, but what he's talking about is, something out of the norm from what a particular community might be used to using, or something new, like an invented new form. The familiar ones, they're powerful because of, like I said, they reduce that cognitive burden, and the audience doesn't have to sort of learn your visual vocabulary, the visual language that you're using. They can focus on your claim that you're making with the data. But novel forms, they can be useful when the goal is to attract attention and signal that something is different, or show a relationship that standard forms might hide, in a sense, right? It's easy to get lost along the lines or the dots, trying to find one that is meaningful, especially to you, or that resonates with you in terms of like something that might affect your life, right? So the more novel the form, the more explanation that you have to give your audience. You might need to leave a little bit of extra room to give that explanation of what the person is looking at. Then we have density. It's the amount of information packed into a single visualization, one level. How many variables, how many categories or annotations, how many visual encodings all at once. So dense visuals, they can be more appropriate for expert audiences who are used to reading data visualizations. We have these conventions in our fields. Our different disciplines does things the same way, right? We learn from the people who do it. But, in a live talk, let's say, density, it competes with your voice, right? So if you must show a dense chart, consider what we call progressive disclosure, where you might show the bare bones version and then several slides in rapid succession that build up to that density so that you can kind of explain it on the way, especially to the audience. Dimensionality is about layers and depth, whether a visualization allows multiple views of the same data set. And we're used to this now because of the interactive graphics that we can see online. The New York Times is really good at this. Those are kind of the obvious examples, but things like small multiples, side-by-side panels, slide sequences, again, that reveal this disclosure over time. Those can also be treated as as more multidimensional graphics. Again, it's always about the audience. Are you trying to explore, or is it about decision? Is it for decision makers like the IEI folks? Repeating the same idea in multiple forms, especially in print, you don't have a lot of page real estate when you're publishing in a journal. And so you have to be mindful of that, but sometimes it appears wasteful, but redundancy is why dashboards work. We're familiar with data dashboards, right? We're familiar with different presentation modes of the same kind of data, and that's the strategy of data dashboards. They show the same story, through totals and trends and categories, and break them down. And what they do, though, is they give the audience, the reader, different entry points into the data. So maybe there's one that somebody recognizes more than another approach, right? That is why you would create redundant data visualizations. Use too much, it tends to feel like noise, right? And again, the difference here is intent, supporting understanding, not just to fill space, right? And so this is the last dimension I wanted to highlight because it's probably the most controversial one in the data viz community. It's the most debated, it's the most hated or loved, etc. A lot of people argue that, they call it chart junk. You probably heard that. Have you heard of Edward Tufte? Right, everyone knows Edward Tufte. He's kind of an old curmudgeon-y guy. That's okay. He's also an excellent presenter. He makes great points. His books are very informative. He would be on that list of long stuff on one of those slides that I just showed, certainly. He is one of the people who definitely advocate against decoration. and this makes sense, right? But he calls it a distraction. He says if you have to use decoration, then you've got the wrong numbers, or some quote like that, right? And certainly in some situations, like technical reviews and regulatory reporting, or with highly skeptical audiences, probably that minimalist approach is better. And I'm not making this stuff up, by the way. Like I'm basing this on research and some of the papers, or a lot of the papers that I've read. So there's empirical evidence to back up these claims that I'm making, right? I didn't have time with my presentation to put that stuff in, so I apologize. But there recently, as recent as last year even, but this has been, for the past 5 years, I would say, a body of research has been developing around this role of visual adornment in data visualization. Cognitive psychology shows that certain kinds of visual emphasis and contextual cues can help people remember. Other studies comparing, people's responses to the same data in different ways, one being more minimal, one being more decorated, right? Those studies show that in many cases, ornamentation helps with recall, right? We remember things visually. So just want to go over a few practical strategies that are specific to visual communication here for, making sense of the phenomena that you're trying to represent. These are design decisions that related to how you choose to decode data. And it's not the data itself. It's not the points. It's not the line, the graph per se. It's all the surrounding stuff that supports it. How you treat the axes, how you treat the labels and the typography and the call outs, the legends and things like that. They're so often just an afterthought, in data visualization and in publication, in journals and presentations. I see it all the time. And of course, just as an aside, I do want to emphasize that using visual design tactics to guide attention is not the same as using visual design to deceive. We've all seen How to Lie with Statistics, and it was Mark Twain or not, the Chamberlain, sorry, one of the UK Chamberlain from the 40s or something, who said, there's 3 kinds of lies: damn lies, and statistics, right? So we've seen and we've read these kinds of arguments, right? Of course, what I'm talking about here is emotion and persuasion. Persuasion is unethical, of course, when it hides uncertainty, when you start manipulating scales, when it hides or creates a false impression, cherry picks the data. We as data visualizers, we understand this. We probably have read a lot of guidelines about that, how not to lie with statistics and how to do ethical visualization. But it's persuasive in a good way, in that how teaching is persuasive. It helps people see what's there. Their eyes might not be trained to see it. And so that is the importance of using persuasion, trying to move an audience, motivate an audience, right? A lot of us in science, especially if you're studying climate change and vaccination data and stuff like that, trying to communicate that stuff to the public, right? It is about persuasion. So just a few of these kind of visual approaches I wanted to run through. So consistency, visual consistency. It's a part of the story. It's a part of your claim, right, that you're making with your data. So for bar charts, the standard rule is to start at 0 because the bar's length visually implies magnitude. If you truncate the axis, small differences can actually look dramatic, right? You see the gap between the years at the top, no gap versus the bottom. It's more realistic. Trying to show that a quiet period, right? Dual axes, be cautious about that, just because, when 2 lines move together, it's sort of implying a correlation. Might not be the intent. And you could sort of consider alternatives, right? So like normalizing the values, the percentages, using small multiples, that idea of redundancy, or splitting the story across, 2 different but similar charts. So this is my big thing, is all of the text, which is typography. incorporated, and there's a lot of it, right? In most data visualizations, there is a lot of reading to be done, not just looking. And a lot of words. And a lot of scientific data visualizations treat typography as an afterthought. How many of you just kind of open it up and go with Helvetica because it kind of populates, right? A lot of people do that. Talk a little bit more about sort of the tools we use and defaults that are embedded in a minute here, but typography is one of the easiest ways to increase legibility and readability. It's mainly about consistency, there is a method to the madness in all the different types of information in a data visualization. There is a reason why the axes and the numbers on the axes can be tiny, tiny small versus what is it that you want to emphasize in a data visualization? That's the thing that's the darkest, the boldest, maybe the biggest. Titles, subtitles, captions, all of these are typographic decisions. You don't just like have a blank field box and you just kind of type in what you want to say or what you want to have somebody read in your data visualization. Those things are decisions. So, these are practical things like, you saw the slide with the lack of contrast in that slide. Those are the kinds of decisions we're talking about with typography too. There's this kind of rule of thumb that I suggest, which is if you can stand 4 feet back from your monitor, that means in a room projection, the audience is able to read it. And 4 feet back is a bit, right? I can read what's on on this, not mine, laptop, right? So that's kind of a rule of thumb. Some of those heuristic rules of thumb are pretty helpful. Labels again. Think of labels, they're part of the story, especially, how many of you, when you are creating data visualizations, are you thinking of it as a data story? You've probably heard that term before. Has everyone heard that term before? I know it's been for a while, this kind of approach, and data journalists certainly advocate for it. I'm not necessarily advocating for that here. What I am suggesting is that it's a part of the story that you're trying to tell, whether it's about someone making a decision using your data, or you're trying to make them understand some important topic, through your data. All of these typographic decisions, including the labels, which also seem to get such an afterthought. If you look at the top one, the top example, do you guys know the Gapminder software? It's been around for quite a while. It's a wonderful tool for visualizing World Health data, and it animates it for you too. So Hans Rosling is the guy that invented it. If you just did a YouTube search, you would see some amazing presentations he's done with this tool, and how the animation tells the story of very statistically driven, science-driven numbers. So check him out. He's in that list, I believe. So we have things like don't avoid rotated labels, don't make your audience turn your head. I know you're trying to squish things into, the screen real estate. You have to always be thinking, is this easy to read? Do I want to read it? Can I read it? Do I want to read it? Can I? And you ask that question of each thing or each visual decision that you're making along the way. If you have a lot of categories, you might want to consider flipping the chart, right? So that the bars, I guess squeeze more into the space that you have. And let's see, let me move on to legends, because this wraps into what I wanted to say here. Look, legends, of course, are useful, they're required, but every kind of, how many of you done this, reading the newspaper, right? Where you have this large data visualization and the news article that you're reading and the legend is way up here in the corner and you're kind of like looking and you're like this, right? That's a lot of cognitive burden for your reader. So whenever you can, what you should do is try to move that legend in very close to what you want somebody to be reading. You don't want them to have to go too far with their eyes, moving back and forth. Again, that's a readability, legibility kind of question. You want them, again, here's that word glanceable. How easy is it to notice something at a glance? That means stripping away a lot of information, right? If you look at the legend on the bottom visualization, it's like, holy crap, you should never. Pie charts are good for only a couple of categories, right? We've heard this probably a lot, but look at the legend that goes along with that when you break that rule. Trying to, even though that legend is so close, you're still like, right, trying to read it. Strategies might be incorporating the type into the category, into the pie slice, but I also read a lot of things and just don't use a pie chart when you have that many categories, of course. Call outs, again, similar to legends in a way, but they really are a powerful way to guide attention, especially in presentations, because they tell the audience, this is what I want you to notice. This is it. This is the thing, with this bigger context of a data visualization. A good call out is going to add context without overwhelming the whole chart. Again, New York Times is really good at this. A poor call out is going to kind of selectively label in a way that sort of biases the interpretation or maybe hides counter examples, right? So these are the kind of how not to lie with statistics issues. And then, icons and images, they're fun. They can help people, again, connect with a topic, and they can make an image feel less abstract. But they can also make comparison harder, especially that bottom chart where you're trying to decipher back and forth between what does that image mean? What sport is that? And how many of them are there, in Florida versus California, right? If the primary task is to compare values precisely, then it's better to use the abstract charts, bars, things like that. If it's about understanding what those numbers refer to, that's what you're aiming for with your communication goal, then images really can help you there. How am I on time? Because I didn't even pay attention. So when am I supposed to be done?
Like maybe 5 or 6 or 7.
I can do it.
Okay.
No problem. I just wanted to
We
make.
started a few minutes late. So.
You did. So you in Zoom land, we're almost there. And I am wrapping this up here. I want to just spend a little bit more time on data and emotion because, these are two concepts. Persuasion, data, and emotion, concepts that are rarely associated. They don't go well together in a sense. We think of data as being rational and objective. Emotions are integral to how we interpret and engage with information. And that is from research in cognitive psychology, that emotions help us understand. The tradition of analyzing visual choices as rhetorical acts. So what I'm saying here is that as you make decisions about how you're encoding a data visualization, it's a rhetorical act. Even trying to be neutral, that's rhetorical. Right? You cannot not communicate, in that sort of intention, in terms of your intentions. They mean something. And of course, like adornment, emotion and persuasion, they're argued about in the visualization community. And of course, again, it's unethical when it comes to deception, but in sort of, especially in the science community, I mean, I know that we all belong to tribes and territories, right? We all do things the way we do them. That's our culture, our disciplinary culture. But in sort of, and I see this especially in the natural sciences, I've collaborated with a lot of scientists, so it's interesting. And when they sort of just shun this topic altogether, though, what is happening is that you're promoting a science and a numbers centric viewpoint on your audience. It's one thing if you're writing for a journal to your own community, you do it in the way that you normally do it. It's again about thinking about your audience. It's also, I think, led to this illusion that there's an objective way to visually present data when there really isn't. Objectively, there's one right way to do it. And that kind of dogma, I mean, I hear it in my classes all the time, or lectures that I go to, or the scientists that I collaborate. You can't do it that way, right? However, if this were true, then given the same exact type of data to, different people, scientists, it would be visualized the exact same way over and over again. Why would we deviate? But we have to remember that data is collected, analyzed with intent by humans. So in this very process of collecting and cleaning data and analyzing it, the researcher is creating a persuasive message, building an argument, right, for the science. I think it's perhaps more ethical to acknowledge this sort of, it is a choice. It's not totally objective. It's not totally neutral. Instead of kind of masking it under this guise of objective neutrality. Data is a logical material that behaves in a very supernatural way, if you think about it, right? We either need to see the data or believe in it. I'm thinking about people every day reading the newspaper, and there's so many data visualizations in the Times and whatnot that help augment a story, right? For most people, most of the time, data is intangible. And the frameworks that inform the movement of data through society, they're expert, they're logical, and they're at a granular scale. And there's plenty of technical and legalistic ways that we talk about data on a day-to-day basis, but they don't exactly connect to the real life we experience and how we experience it. A common response, you've probably heard this before, right, to charts is that people just need more data literacy. Data literacy does matter, but that framing can very subtly or not so subtly blame the audience for not being experts, right? Another way to say it is our work is only useful when other people can use it. So visualization is one of the ways that we make that possible. It's not about dumbing anything down. It's about designing access. That's what you're doing when you're creating a visualization of anything, whether taking a photo, you're designing access. So you want to allow non-experts to engage meaningfully, right? Ask good questions. You want them to make informed decisions, right? That's the intention, hopefully. And then, so of stewards of your discipline, I want to mention the problem again. I'm going to go back to this. I'll be very quick, I promise, with defaults. How many of you use Excel to visualize your data? Sometimes, a lot of times, or R, think of all the tools that we use. Think about all of the defaults that when we open up that shiny new product that are embedded in these tools that we use on a day-to-day basis. Think about the defaults and how bad they are, how unthought out they are, because really the purpose of defaults is to let you see, let's say if it's an Excel, they want to put all the bells and whistles, have them turned on for you so that you can see the possibility. But what often happens, right, is you just kind of go with that and you don't dig under the hood of the software tools we use to figure out what are better defaults. And I also want to talk a little bit about conventions in science. They matter, especially for replication. and peer review, but they can also become these habits that we stop questioning. In journals, dense figures are sometimes appropriate because readers can linger and they can read and they can dissect and they can get out their magnifying glass if they want. But but I've seen exact scientific journal publications translated into slideshows, word for word, image for image, exactly. I can't tell you how many times. I go to a lot of science presentations for this reason, for my own, but I enjoy them, but I also am trying to understand approaches and what's going on. So just remember that the translation process, you are responsible for that when you're presenting to different audiences. And if you think about it, communicating sciences to others is a scientist's most important responsibility. In the education of scientists, you faculty, you can speak to this more because I try to find courses like this in curricula that are about communicating science. We have plenty of them that help us write well, write proposals well, write journals, submissions, write the sort of technical expectations of a scientist, whether social science, artificial science, natural science, right? We kind of do things similarly in this regard. How many courses are there that help us communicate science in your curricula? Is this a common thing? Are there courses that you have? I'm just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, we have one. It's new though. So
New, yeah, I know. There's been quite a few new ones popping up at state too, and yay, it's about time, right? All I'm saying here is question all defaults, question conventions. We have all these rules when we try to publish rules for a journal, oh my gosh. But journals are going online more and more. Most of them are totally online. That doesn't, so you should be able to put videos in your data visualizations. You should be able to embed animations, et cetera, et cetera. But, journals, they have their ways of doing things and their conventions too. Doesn't hurt to make suggestions, right? And then finally, I want to reframe. This is the kind of scientific wheel with the scientists on top and the non-technical folks on the bottom and all the overlap in the middle. So what I really want to do is redefine this word data visualization because it sounds like a technical step, something done at the end. But just remember the process of visualization is about making an argument about the world. And you're revealing relationships, you're defining what counts as evidence, and you're guiding attention towards what matters. And you're trying to get at some kind of truth to move people, make them feel it, to see what couldn't be seen before, to change minds, speak, or to spark action, right? So your communications will be successful if you think of visualization as a process on its own. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna go to the last slide right now. And I can share these slides so that you have this sort of checklist. I'm not going to go through that, but if you have these questions in mind when you're creating something along with the legibility and readability, it's just a nice rubric for you to evaluate the things that you yourself produce. Okay? Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
If some people have to leave because you have limited time, please, feel free, but we will take a couple of questions and then we'll allow Dr. Littlejohn to have people come out if she has time to stay. So do we have questions? Go ahead.
It's sort of staying on your last statement, you yourself produce. So nowadays you open PowerPoint and this helpful thing off to the side is how about making it look like this? So I'm going to make a guess as to whether you're pro or con such things, but maybe you can comment on the ubiquity of it now.
Well, so and AI, right, to generate generative AI. And I honestly don't have much of a problem with it as long as you don't take it lock, stock, and barrel and don't evaluate it. Those things are helpful. It's nice to not have to confront a tabula rasa, the blank page, right? Staring at it. So But you do have to look at all the, I mean, there's a lot of template options, right, in these tools. You have to evaluate them. It's not just like, click, that looks good, click. I think that tends to happen more often than not, in the kind of questioning what it's good for.
Do you have other questions? Go ahead.
So I feel like you've talked a lot about like knowing your audience. Like, how do you recommend you get to know your audience?
That is like the one of the top questions, especially when you're invited. Like I don't know who you guys are. I did a lot of reading about who the science communicators of North Carolina are. I didn't know who my audience would be, right? But by reading and looking at past things that have been presented and topics and whatnot, I got a sense for like, oh, how long are these things? How quick do they go? How many people show up? What do they like to hear? Is it a relaxed, informal thing? Or is it, you gotta wear a tie? I mean, there's all this sort of how we do things around here. That's a culture, right? So that there's that. I would also ask people, like, let's say you're invited, you could say, well, who has presented there? Maybe you can email that person and get a sense. You got to do some sleuthing of your own. I think there's no easy way to do that, unfortunately.
We had an online question I'm going to ask, see if anybody else has. It's basically asking, do you have seen trends that will come to work best on mobile phones for presentations?
Can you repeat that again?
Have you seen trends that have come to work best on mobile phones, like for visualizations, for infographics and things like that?
So, I honestly can't think of any, because why would somebody present on a mobile phone?
Well, I mean,
I read stuff, I watch video stuff,
Right.
and if what the question is about is, have I seen trends or have I seen guidelines and rubrics and things like that?
probably that's the question.
That's more, I think you can find that stuff in UX design, user experience design, user interface design.
Yeah.
Because that is all about how you translate a website into a mobile app, into an environment or some kind of larger, different kind of display. There are tools for understanding how that works. I'm not sure there's any specific to like presentations.
Okay, yeah, I think it was asking, I guess, about presenting visuals like on a small screen, like if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I guess the thought would be, it has to be, the complexity does have to be stripped way down. I mean, and when you think about all the different kinds of mobile phones out there and who's got the flip phone from 3 decades ago, I mean, let me tell you, the phone I have, I had to get the new one recently, but the one that finally stopped charging was over 10 years old. I don't care about new phones. Right? So there are people out there like that, and designing for all of that is very difficult. I think the UX UI literature is where I would go to find out.
Okay. Other question? We'll take one more, and then if people want to come up after. Go ahead.
It's not really a question, but kind of related to that. I saw some new research out now that the younger generation is responding more to like Reels style videos of like short clips explaining videos. So maybe that's what they mean of like incorporating social media.
So can you elaborate a little bit more on
Yeah.
what the thing is that you saw or the trend that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I wish I had like the actual study pulled up, but they were looking at the differences in like generations, like Gen Alpha versus millennials, and how they respond to people communicating science through short video clips on social media.
Got it,
And
understood.
so like there's data now to support that like the younger generation is more likely to read or swipe through or even comprehend like usable data through a video format versus even like just a visual.
That
And I'm
makes
sure that like there's probably way more to it in terms of like them also being used to like brain rot, and that's like how they used other information. But
I'm gonna tell you to search something because I would love to pull it up, but we're out of, it's a New York Times video. It's older, but it's how fast is Usain Bolt? It is brilliant as a data visualization, but it's an animated video that tells that story. And it's all data, but I can see, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because number one, if it's on the phone, they're gonna look at it and swipe through it and blah, 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 but it is the animation that's storytelling aspect of data visualization. It's more data journalism, if you guys are familiar. That's a kind of a different field. It's not the field I'm in. They have their own little disciplinary cultures that they adhere to, and I love learning about them. And, you know, I have my own, you know. So anyway, I guess, you looking at it? You looking at the Usain Bolt?
No, I was gonna find you the graph of what I was talking about.
Oh, got it. Well, anyway, I can understand because it is storytelling, and you know, that's a word in the data viz community these days as well. Right?
Well, we'll wrap it up there, but please feel free to come up if you have additional questions.
Okay, I feel like I was stumbling and the technology was like.